Dear learners, this lecture will be on Module 4 Social Inequality and Health, Unit Globalization of Health and Diseases. Let's start the topic Globalization of Health and Diseases. So, what is globalization? Globalization refers to the increasing interconnections among societies, regions, nations in terms of their economy, culture, and other values. At a global level, the world gradually moves towards becoming a single whole, where something happening at one place has an effect in most of the places, since they are all interconnected. In terms of health, globalization indicates an aspect of this phenomenon. World Health Organization has been working in this field, where their attempt focuses on assisting countries to assess and act on the cross-border risks to public health security. Scholars have been asking whether healthcare is becoming more alike as globalization connects the economic, political, and social systems at a global level. They support collective action since domestic action often remain inefficient and thus ensure cross-border health risks. Looking at globalization's impact on health, which can be easily fast-tracked through media exposure and technological information resources, Rochford described threads of connections derived from global shift and called it emerging convergences. It means that due to fast-growing global links, cross-national and dependent imperatives are growing in the case of expansion of access to healthcare, financing of care, government rules, patient choice. Globalization is affecting diseases equally. Paul Farmer has shown global social inequalities are at the center of many emerging diseases. According to his study, those in power use structural violence to erase history by discouraging scrutiny of the political, economic factors that brings humans into contact with pathogens. Globalization, along with two other interrelated factors, urbanization and disease emergence, affect the disease and health. George Lagos and Christine Harper suggest that globalization has a deep impact on the use of antibiotics. Common notion about antibiotics is that a new one can be developed when a pathogen becomes resistant to a specific antibiotic. But this should have been foretold that resistant antibiotics were inevitable. There is a massive use and production of antibiotics. Just as infectious diseases have been subjected to globalization, antibiotics resistance has made the same end. Emergence of diseases which are resistant to at least one antibiotic and some resistant to many antibiotics is a challenge in the era of globalization. Globalization is now also coupled with unprecedented urbanization and global warming, which poses different kinds of threats. World Health Organizations, whose initiative regarding globalization and health mentioned earlier becomes very important, where the world is collectively facing lots of health issues. One important part of their program is Global Public Goods (GPG), where they provide a framework for assessing and resolving problems of collective action at the global level. The concept of GPG offers a powerful lens to analyze and promote the health of the poor. Our next topic is medical tourism and its impact in a globalized world. Medical tourism is an emerging concept in the tourism industry. It refers to any form of tourism undertaken with the purpose of addressing a health concern, at the same time receiving equal to or greater care than they would have in their home country. Medical tourism became an attractive option for potential economic growth in many countries across the world. Some of the countries that actively promote medical tourism include Belgium, Costa Rica, Cuba, Hungary, India, Jordan, Malaysia, South Africa, and Thailand. The following are responsible for increased consumption for healthcare beyond borders: desire of healthy life, advanced technology, cost saving, increasing availability of information and communication to consumers worldwide. Since late 1970s, health tourism has been widely accepted as an international phenomenon for individuals traveling, in which patients travel foreign countries. The practice of traveling internationally for surgery, however, is a relatively recent phenomenon. That growth appeared to parallel the worldwide boom in medical tourism that took place in the early 21st century. Now, travel for medical treatment has enormously expanded, and hence many travel from developed countries to low or middle income countries is seen, often to avoid high costs and long delays. The globalization of healthcare, which includes medical tourism, has become a reality, which has assumed increasing importance for developing countries, particularly in Asia. There are three types of medical tourism. First, outbound. This type of medical tourism occurs when patients travel from the home country to a foreign country to receive medical treatment. Inbound. This type involves patients traveling from a foreign country to the home country in search of medical care. Third one is intrabound or domestic. This refers to patients traveling to another part of their own country. No international travel happens here. Now let us understand the factors and development in the field of medical tourism. Medical tourism is opted because of different reasons, which include better quality care for medically necessary procedures, most advanced technology, lower cost care, and quick access for medically necessary procedures, trust in the healthcare system of the target country, and so on. In addition, there are some other developments in the field of medical tourism, which are types of health and medical intervention have considerably diversified, ranging from superficial treatments such as facials and massages to highly invasive and risky surgical procedures such as open heart surgery, and in some cases a combination of both. For example, cosmetic tourism, which encompasses cosmetic and reconstructive surgery and some forms of dentistry. Another important development in health and medical tourism appears in the emphasis placed on marketing and the varied priority placed on health. So what is new about this globalization? What is new about globalization is its scale and pace. Globalization has been defined as the process of closer interactions of human activity across a range of spheres, including the economic, social, political, and cultural experience along three dimensions: spatial, temporal, and cognitive. Our perception of physical space have changed. The depth of distance has made the world feel smaller. More people travel and more often. In 1950, there were 2 million international airline passengers a year. Today, there are 1.4 billion. Our perceptions of time have changed. The communication revolution has heightened our expectations of quick turnarounds. Anyone who has experience of email knows that answers are expected immediately, as we no longer rely on postal systems. Even remote backpacker beaches in Thailand are on the internet. The spread of ideas, cultures, and values covers not only the worldwide availability of Japanese cameras, Chinese mobiles, Asian clothes, or Colombian coffee, but also transfer of culture through films and other media, and of political ideas such as the neoliberalism of the 1980s, which in turn fostered the health system reform movement. Globalization can be characterized by five often conflicting themes. While separated here conceptually, they are clearly interdependent. First one is economic transformation or fluidity in investment. There is more fluid investment across borders. For example, foreign investment in hospital management has increased as business have looked for opportunities in other countries to open private clinics and hospitals. Although these are often joint ventures, that is, local partners are mandatory, a significant characteristic of commercial presence in hospitals operation and management is the involvement of companies whose traditional business lies outside the healthcare services, such as pharmaceutical companies. The way they measure outcomes may differ from those of traditional health sectors. Another technique for penetrating foreign markets is through managed care services, which combine management and insurance. Here, foreign commercial presence has grown as it has in the insurance sector. 2. New trade regime. The area where global contestations is occurring and will continue is over trade-related aspects of intellectual property, TRIPS. TRIPS obliges all WTO members to provide a minimum of 20 years patent protection on drugs. Compulsory licensing, which is constant with TRIPS, allows countries for reasons of public interest to grant a license without permission from patent holder, who nevertheless gets some remuneration. This means a particular drug can be produced much more cheaply. South Africa has blazed the trail here, having come under huge pressure to repeat its draft machines law, which would allow compulsory licensing and parallel import of age-related drugs, although its latest policy on age have caused worldwide concern. In the meantime, of course, poor people are losing out because of the lack of access to or high price of essential drugs that could alleviate suffering or even prevent death. A growing poverty gap, rising health inequalities. 20% of world's population live in absolute poverty with an income of less than $1 per day. Surviving on less than $2 a day is a reality for almost half the people on the planet. And with the passage of time, in many countries of the world, health systems have deteriorated. Access is poor, quality is poor, and drugs are not available. In some low-income countries, over 70% of the health budget is obtained from external sources. Attention on emerging and re-emerging infectious disease has risen over the last decade, partly because of growing resistance, new disease such as age and self-interest. Tuberculosis, for example, was described as conquered in the industrialized world in the 1950s, but has re-emerged in the late 1980s. Fourth, the electronic revolution. Electronic communications offer extraordinary opportunities, and even in very remote parts of the world, it is possible to connect to the internet. But to take advantage of this opportunity, people need to have access to regular electricity, computers, training, and education. There are many people without such access run the risk of further marginalization. We hardly know the extent to which electronic communications will change commerce, E-commerce, such as sale of pharmaceuticals via the internet, has implications of loss of revenue for governments as well as to all those selling to the public, creating further disadvantages for those unable to access cheaper medicines. It also raises huge question about regulation with respect to drug resistance, drug abuse, and so on. In the same way, telemedicine, the practice of medical care using interactive audio, visual, and data communications, includes medical care delivery, consultation, diagnosis, and treatment, as well as education and transfer of medical data, is another area likely to grow with improved communications. It is still relatively limited, but there are already a few commercial enterprises providing services across a number of industrialized countries and increasingly in low-income countries. Fifth, new forms of governance, the proliferation of non-state actors. Finally, where at one time we looked to the state to provide the rules and framework of engagement, the role of the state is increasingly being transformed, with transnational social and political movement now becoming more and more important. The entry of the private sector into the health sector reminds us how far the health landscape has changed. Today there is huge convergence and a great deal of discussion about partnership between private and public sectors. At the national level, where governments are making deals or contracting private sector companies to undertake tasks previously the responsibility of the public sector. Public-private partnerships are also apparent at the global level and indeed are beginning to be recognized as potentially new systems of global governance. No longer is WHO the main health player at the international level. The corporate sector, especially the pharmaceutical industry, is increasingly a major player, as too are the new philanthropists who have made large profits from communications and global media business. Dozens of public-private partnerships between UN agencies, governments, industry, and both new and old foundations have sprung up over the past few years. Some of these are donation programs where pharmaceutical companies have donated doses of a particular drug to help eliminate a particular disease. The best known and the longest established of this is the Mactizen donation program, where Merck has donated ivermectin for as long as necessary to get rid of river blindness in Africa. Other companies have followed Merck's example in the last few years. Glaxo Wellcome is giving Malarone as a second-line treatment against malaria in Kenya. Pfizer has donated Zytromax to tackle trachoma. SmithKline Beacon has provided albendazole to help eliminate filariasis. Now let's discuss globalization and its impact on India's healthcare system. There have been health debates between pro and anti-globalists about its impact, particularly on the poor in low and middle income countries. One area in which the potential impacts of globalization are most pronounced is in the field of health. Indeed, increased interaction and increased knowledge sharing have allowed huge milestones to be reached, notably the global eradication of smallpox in 1979, resulting from a global effort spearheaded by WHO, itself a product of globalization. In response to discussion on the benefits and shortfalls of globalization, scholars such as Cornea have put forwarded the idea that if properly managed, globalization can lead to important health gains. But the accusation that globalization is contributing to widening inequalities between populations nationally and internationally is a commonly heard rhetoric. even within developed countries. In the case of India and its healthcare system, it would seem that sadly critics of globalization and liberalization are right to some extent. Globalization in India is creating a barrier for marginalized people and the rural poor to access healthcare. Indeed, those Indians who still experience significant barriers to access healthcare are overwhelmingly found to be in rural areas. According to World Bank, in 2007, 70% of the Indian population lived in village areas. However, healthcare infrastructure statistics for the same year highlighted the fact that only 20% of country's hospital beds were located in village areas. While this statistic takes into account both public and private hospital facilities, private sector hospitals, clinics and dispensaries now make up a significantly larger share of rural facilities compared to public hospitals. Overall, however, even the number of private facilities remain too low. Indeed, in 2007, 12% of those living in rural areas who did not seek care for a medical ailment started a lack of access as their main inhibitor, irrespective of their ability to fund their care. Alongside a lack of access, the imposition of user fees has often been cited as a barrier to accessing health services, suggesting that overall they are determined. Alongside a lack of access, the imposition of user fees has often been cited as a barrier to accessing healthcare services, suggesting that overall they are detrimental to a country's health system, despite the economic rationale for implementing them. The effect that such fees have had on those seeking care both in rural and urban areas have been profound, widening inequality and pushing many into poverty. In 2014, a review of access to healthcare in India published in the Lancet found that in 2004, around 25% of the Indian population were unable to access healthcare. Of those that did, in 2010, 60 million Indians fell below the poverty line as a result of out-of-pocket spending for healthcare, of which user fees represent a significant proportion. The share of out-of-pocket spending as a proportion of total spending on healthcare has been increasing since independence, and now it stands at roughly 80% of total health expenditure. This out-of-pocket expenditure has also increased in absolute terms, so that it is now one of the main causes of direct debt and poverty. Out-of-pocket expenses are largely made up of user fees, drug prices and travel costs, as well as economic loss incurred from not working during this time. These economic losses are disproportionately affect those living in rural areas, as their household income lost per treated person for non-hospitalization cases stands at around rupees 135 in rural areas against rupees 96 in urban areas. Furthermore, the economic benefit that user fees brings to hospitals' budgets can be called into questions. Indeed, a review of their use in multiple Indian states found that in general they account for less than 2% of hospitals' total budget. Therefore, it does not seem that such a small proportion hospitals' budget justifies the implementation of user fees, considering the negative impact that these have on poor's access to medical care. We should not ignore the huge strides India has made in improving the health of its population since 1947 by doubling its life expectancy, but much remains to be done. In conclusion, therefore, it seems that whilst India's public health policies do not fail to recognize the need to ensure the accessibility of healthcare services for the poor, more must be done to ensure the policies are properly implemented and enforced. This will ensure that the development of medical tourism industry does to conflict with every Indian's right to highest attainable standard of care without distinction of race, religion, political belief, economic or social condition. Now let's sum up what we have discussed. Firstly, we discussed the concept of globalization. Then we analyze its relations with health and diseases. Secondly, we talked about the idea of medical tourism and how it is related with globalization. Then we discuss about 5 conflicting themes which revolves around globalization. And then we ended the discussion by understanding the impact of globalization in healthcare system of India. Thank you.